Kevin, teach us.
Okay, so I heard a share yesterday, a podcast I came across by Rabbi Justin Trieger. I think he's involved in the Santon community and he's an account CA and he's a ROF. So he does a lot of accounting. So anyway, what he said was, yeah, he does a lot of accounting work, so to speak, in more ways than one. So he was discussing the midah of generosity. And he said if people are too stingy with their money. They can't develop a full relationship with Hashem. I mean, this is a lifetime work with everyone, all of us, everyone. And he said, if people don't overcome this midah, that they're not going to have the full benefit of a relationship with Hashem, the relationship the optimum relationship. There'll be barriers to that relationship. And what he said, he gave some practical tools. I mean, he was talking generally. Like, let's say if you have a utility bill, that money let's say for using the electricity or water, you've used it, you need to pay for it. So if we keep on putting it off and procrastinating and not paying it, it's we should overcome that. When you get a bill, pay it straight away. It's actually the money isn't yours. You've used a service and you need to pay for it. So that was one of the techniques. So one of the suggestions: pay it immediately. If you owe someone money, pay them unless someone needs to organize terms. But that just says it's just one example that he gave. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Thanks. I was intrigued by that.
Mm.
All right.
Good
So
one.
let's
Yeah.
get started. So what we said yesterday, the bottom line of it is that the Gemara needed to find some similar case that would agree with Rabbi Meir that you could have more than one penalty, number one, because there's a pasuk on bearing false witness, which has a separate penalty than the Hazama reciprocal penalty for Eidim Zomimim. And then you've got a case where if Eidim Zomimim make a defendant, they try to get him to get lashed because they accuse him of witnessing that they've witnessed him do a negative commandment. They get two sets of 40 lashes minus one, which is 39 per transgression. And the one transgression is bearing false witness against thy neighbor. The other one is the reciprocal penalty if they intended to get the defendant lashed for breaking a negative commandment. It's done to them. The rabbis used this term, the singular version of rishato, which is wickedness, which you can only be held liable for one punishment. So the first thing that the Gemara said is, look, let's see a case which can support Rabbi Meir. And that first one is Rabbi Meir derived it from the law of one who defames his wife, because the husband that gave that false accusation or testimony against his newly married wife, where she would have got the death penalty because he didn't want to pay for divorce, which is exactly what Rabbi Trieger said, that sometimes if you become overly obsessed with money, you can come to commit absolute treacherous acts. What's involved? 100 shekels to the girl's father, 100 silver shekels, and he receives lashes. So this is a proof that in fact there are certain acts at which there is that are not verbal that one can receive two different transgression repayments for. So that would appear to be in Rabbi Meir's favor. And then the Gemara said, well, look, problem is the case of a defamer is a fine, and Eidim Zomimim, according to most rabbinical opinions, is known as a mammon, a compensatory payment, because what you intended to do to the defendant is done to the Eidim Zomimim, which is compensatory matching in nature, measure for measure, whether it was death, corporal punishment, or monetary payment. But Rabbi Akiva holds that in fact it's also Eidim Zomimim fine, because he said, whilst you attempted to do that, it didn't actually cost the defendant any money, because the sentence wasn't carried out, which is why you can apply the reciprocal penalty. So since Rabbi Meir holds, like Rabbi Akiva, they're both a fine, you can learn a case of a fine from a fine in terms of principle, but you can't learn a case of compensation from a fine because it's not logically intuitive and it's punitive in nature. Um, so then the Gemara said, well, look, there's a second version of Ulla's statement, and it was talking about the consumption of the Pesach offering, that you shall not leave any of it until morning, and that which is left until morning you shall burn in a fire. That was in Shemot chapter 12, verse 10. So what we're saying there is that according to Rabbi Yehuda, is that the reason why you don't receive lashes for it is there's a positive remedy of burning the leftover to remedy the prohibition, because you weren't meant to leave over any of its contents until morning. And it's only because of that positive remedy, like when you steal, you're not given lashes for stealing. You only have to return what you stole. Is any positive commandment that remedies a negative commandment, there are no lashes. It's only the positive commandment that would have to be filled. So you might say, oh, well, the failure here, that the reason why the person should get lashed is because they failed to do the positive rectification. They don't get lashed in that particular case. It prevents them from doing that, but if it went before a base din for theft, they would be meant to pay double if it was for theft, or if it was for compensation, certainly made to be paying the primary principal back. As far as it's concerned, where there's a negative commandment transgressed, if it's remedied by a positive commandment, you might have to bring an atonement offering, but certainly you don't get lashed. And Shemaim, they hold you responsible. But in other words, just having that positive remedy precludes the need for lashes as the official remedy. If you fail to do that positive mitzvah, then there's no lashes, but there is an accountability. Okay, so that was what Rabbi Yehuda said. Now, some say that Rabbi Akiva says, some say it's Rabbi Akiva, some say it's Rabbi Yosef, that basically, sorry, not Rav Yosef, Rav Yaakov. They're different versions of the text. This comes up against in Shavuos 3b, in 3b, and basically it says Rav Yosef, but in this Gemara it says Rabbi Akiva. So what does he say? He said, look, whilst he agrees that if there's a positive commandment that can remedy a negative commandment, there are no lashes involved. But that's not the primary focus that he has here. He said the reason why you don't get lashes is because it's a prohibition that involves no action. Because we said the transgression doesn't result from an act, but the failure to act, actually. In other words, the failure to eat the entire sacrifice within the proper allotted time. And a person, according to Rabbi Akiva and Rav Yosef, is a person doesn't receive lashes for any prohibition whose transgression involves no action. And then inferred from that is obviously the fact that Rabbi Yehuda requires the additional positive commandment to remove the penalty of lashes. So what does that mean? He's saying, listen, if it wasn't for that positive commandment to burn the remnant of what you were meant to use in terms of the Pesach offering, then you would get lashed, which implies what? That a person does receive lashes for a prohibition that involves no action. So if it were not for the additional positive commandment, Rav Yehuda would hold that he receives lashes for leaving over the offering meat. So what we've done here is prove two things. Is number one, according to Ulla, the first statement, that you can have a case of a non-action that gets two different penalties. The one is Makkos and the other one is payment, such as the case in the defamer. And how do we know this? Because he said if the Adim Zomamim accuse the defendant of stealing 200 zuz, they made to pay the 200 zuz backwards is the monetary aspect for you shall do to him as he intended to do to his brother, and then bearing false witness gets the lashes. So there too, there's two different forms of punishment. So Ula would prove that. And Ula is also proving that for a case that's a non-action, lashes are an appropriate penalty. Why did we say that? Because we said, what are the sages choosing? The sages are choosing to basically have a monetary payment as opposed to lashes when the two are available. So in other words, in this particular case, the sages could say, look, the default penalty is lashes for not bearing false witness, and the default penalty is reciprocal payment for kasha zama, which is the for the Adem Zomamim. So let's just do lashes, and that would cover both, because you can only have one punishment because the singular word harishato for the word wickedness in the pasuk. So why don't we give lashes under kimle rabamine, which means you pay the greater penalty, is because the sages, according to many opinions, not Rabbi Yehuda, is that for a non-action, there are no lashes involved for bearing false witness. But there's a particular stringency when it comes to Adam Zommerman, because it says in the pasuk, you shall do to him as he intended to do to his brother, which means whatever that was, whether it was accusing the defendant of having murdered and therefore that Adam Zommerman get a reciprocal death penalty, to accusing him of stealing money or not paying a debt, at which they are made to pay the money, and accusing him of breaking a negative commandment, of which it's a physical act of a negative commandment, at which the reciprocal penalty would be lashes. So in that particular case, they've gone with the directive in Devarim chapter 19, verse 19, which is Adam Zomamim. Because if you just go about bearing false testimony, there are rabbinical opinions that there is no action, and therefore it doesn't have the default of Malkus, but it does have the default of Malkus with regards to Adam Zomamim. And the question is why if there's no action? And the reason being is Tosfot said that there are opinions that say, like Ula, for example, and Rabbi Meir, that there is certainly lashes for a non action only when you can't apply the reciprocal penalty as a first choice. But if there's that and the payment, we go with the lesser extreme and not kim lebedi rabba minay. So that's where we left off yesterday. So basically where we are today is some understood Ula's point to be in response to this question, because Ula derived it from the law of one who defames his wife. So just as defaming is a prohibition whose transgression involves no action, it's merely defamatory speech. And that's not legally considered an action of based breaking a negative commandment at which one would receive lashes for it. So too, one would receive lashes for any prohibition that does not involve an action. In other words, Ula is saying he's basing the law on Rabbi Yehuda, both with the issue of the Pesach offering, as well as Ula's own explanation of a defamer who pays and receives lashes, which proves for a non-action you can get lashes, and there is a dual punishment. And he's using the defamer as evidence of that, even though it's speech and not an action. So the Gemara doesn't agree. The Gemara says you can't make a comparison to a defamer who receives lashes and must also pay, because there's an unusual severity that can't serve as a model for less stringent laws. Okay, so guys, what do you think the severity is here? I'm asking you a question with the defamer. Guys? Guys, are you hearing me?
Yeah, now we can hear you. Yeah. Sorry, I'm tired. Is anybody awake today? 100%.
Are you talking about the severity of
What I'm asking you
the
is,
defamation or the
no, the
if this,
Gemara's saying here that there's a bit of a problem, and that problem is that it doesn't agree with Ula because this issue has unusual severity. This law of a defamer. What is the unusual severity it has? What's so stringent, guys, about a defamer?
uh,
We went through it last week.
the reputation of the false accusations is tarnished, and they could receive the death penalty.
Okay, so Kevin,
Like if the woman's accused of adultery before marriage, or something like
Kevin's
that.
giving a good answer. In other words, he's giving the reason for the unusual severity of punishment because Kevin's saying rather than pay the value of the ketubah, this man chose to have his new wife executed rather than make that payment. He could have divorced her and just said, I'm not happy with her. He doesn't even have to give a reason. It was a patriarchal world, and he could issue the divorce. So he's particularly despicable because not only would her reputation be tarnished, but um, she could get the death penalty. And it's quite a severe one, being a Nara, by the way. It's a
but let
more
me give you the
severe
example.
one than being by the way, than being uh, a woman that's not in the Rusin betrothal period, neither Nara. If she's a fully fledged adult under Ketubah, it's a less severe death penalty. So Kevin's right. That creates the unusual severity of why a defamer is punished. But what is the severity of his punishment compared
Okay,
to,
so I'll tell you, the
yeah,
severity is that you get both punishments. You get the payment as well as the lashes.
excellent. Excellent, Gavin. That's exactly it. So what we are saying is here, the Gemara
Sorry, I didn't
says,
actually hear what you were talking about. Sorry, that's why I couldn't answer you. I apologize. But I worked it out now when you were talking to Kevin. Sorry.
no, that's perfect. So Gavin's completely correct, is that the unusual severity is you very rarely find a case where even the rabbis hold that there are multiple punishments, one of payment and one of lashes. Even the rabbis would agree with this, not just Rabbi Meir and Ula. Therefore, it's unusual severity, and you can't learn a case of unusual severity. Why? Because if you're dealing with cases that are less severe, how can the case that is very stringent serve as a model for less stringent laws? Does everybody understand the Gemara's problem?
Yeah.
So the Gemara's problem is as follows. How do you learn the laws of Adem Zomimim, which is actually generally a single payment, except for Rabbi Meir, from a law where there's basically payment and lashes? So that's why the rabbis don't agree, because they are saying in that case it's not one wickedness, because it's not, it's a case, the Rishato, specifically related to more to Adem Zimmerman than the defamer, because she could die as a result of that. And therefore, it cannot serve as a model case. And it might be saying that, look, in a case where there is no speech, because of the severity of what he tried to do to his wife by framing her, he gets two penalties. But who's to say that he would even get lashes, never mind two penalties, in a case of a non-action? That's what the rabbis are saying, more than two penalties. Who even knows if lashes would be an appropriate solution in the secondary case? But we see it is. Why? Because if you look at the second Mishnah, when they intended to do a reciprocal punishment for Makkos, they get Makkos. And the reason being is it's reciprocal in nature. And the default position is that the rabbis actually hold that if you can't apply the reciprocal penalty, there is lashes. But, Gavin, and this is where I want to discern, it doesn't say that they're lashes and payment. There's no concept of multiple punishments because of the rishato, the singular version of the word meaning wickedness. Do you get that? So this more stringent model can't serve as that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go on. So the Gemara has to answer that. So having rejected Ulla's explanation, the Gemara is giving another explanation of the source for Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that one receives lashes even for a prohibition that involves no action. So at this case, we've already thrown out, it seems, the opinion from the rabbis that there would be multiple penalties like Rabbi Meir says. Now they're just focusing on this issue of how do you know you even receive lashes as a default position when you can't apply the reciprocal penalty. And Reish Lakish said he derived it from the laws of Zomamim witnesses. Because just as Zomamim witnesses receive lashes for violating a prohibition which does not involve an action, only speech. Okay? In other words, in a case where you can't punish them as they attempted to do to the victim, like when they testified that Akon was the son of a divorcee, the default position is lashes. And Reish Lakish is saying, well, the case of Adam Zomamim proved that. So we don't have to prove from Rabbi Meir that speech is exempt because there's no action. So too, a person receives lashes for any prohibition whose violation does not involve an action. So the Gemara says, well, you've got a bit of a problem here because you can't make a comparison with Zomamim witnesses. Why? Because in contrast to all others that receive lashes, there's no warning that's required prior. In other words, they receive lashes even if they weren't warned in advance that the penalty for testifying falsely is lashes. So, Lance, I just want to add something for you and Brendan, because you never tell it of Simcha Steinhauer's Sanhedrin. So, if a person is sentenced to death, okay, he must be warned just before sinning that what he's about to do is forbidden and subject to that particular penalty. And in Sanhedrin, we have to say that the hazama, which is the warning, not the hazama, that the warning beforehand, do they have to just say it's a death penalty for murdering if you're going to murder this person? Or do they have to state which death penalty it is for murder versus idolatry? In other words, if they catch somebody in the act of adultery, do they have to say, you're going to get this death sentence? The Sanhedrin said, or does it say it suffices just to say you're going to get a death sentence? Okay, so that's what are the discussions about. But either way, there has to be a warning by the witnesses in terms of what to tell the person to stop, and it's forbidden and subject to that penalty. It's the same with lashes. You must be warned just before sinning that what you're doing is a negative commandment and it's forbidden, and therefore you're going to be given lashes. So, Adam Zomamim are treated with exceptional severity. Why? Because a person receives lashes for it without even performing an action, and therefore that might be another unique feature of this law at which other sins cannot be compared. So, Kevin, why do Adam Zomamim get such a harsh penalty, which is they lashed without any prior warning? Why?
Because of their accusation, because of the severity of what would have happened to the person that they accused of, the false accusation of. Maybe that's why.
Correct. They corrupted the justice system and they're making sure an innocent person gets punished. And that's why it's particularly stringent that we lash them without any prior warning. Okay? So the Gemara is saying, look, both of them have got their stringencies. The law of the defamer will prove that lashes for a prohibition involving no action is not limited to sins for which the offender is punished even without a warning, and the defamer does not receive lashes unless he's forewarned. And yet, if he was warned, he does receive lashes even though his sin involves no action. And the reason resumes this one is not like that one is not like this one. So what's it saying bottom line? Is it saying that each case, the defamer and the Edim Zomimim have got its stringencies? Lance, what's the stringency of the defamer? Unique. And what's the stringency of the Edim Zomimim?
No, just a quick question here. You spoke with Kevin now about giving him lashes, but we already discussed that they're not going to get lashes because there are two penalties, and then they're going to get the lighter of the two penalties. They're only going to have to pay a penalty. They're not going to get lashes. So what are you talking about giving him lashes now?
Okay, I'll tell you. You remind me. Your tone reminds me of my school principal, but then I was very naughty. So, Lance, what we are
Was you
saying
last
is as
time?
follows: the Gemara is saying exactly. It's agreeing with you on both points. It's saying that when you've got choices where you've got a lighter penalty of a payment or lashes, we could look at both the rule of the bearing false witness and the rule of the do to him as intended to do to his brother, which is both false testimony, at which lashes apply. But we give the lighter penalty in this case because it's generally not all opinions agree that for bearing false witness, which is not an action-based thing, but a testimony, it's merely defamatory speech, that it's entitled to lashes. So then the question arises that what's going to work is a reciprocal penalty. So in other words, if you intended to cost your brother 200 zuz, you and another witness, you each pay 100 zuz for his recompense. So that fulfills that verse, you shall do to him as he intended to do to his brother, whether it's lashes, death penalty, or monetary payment. The question the Gemara is now asking is, in the case where for whatever reason you can't apply the reciprocal penalty because somebody accuses a Cohen that his father married a divorcee and yet they want to strip him of his Cohen status, which would affect that Cohen as well as his children, unless they found out to be Edim Zomimim. So why shouldn't him and his children suffer? And the reason is that his children, the false witness, his children didn't do anything wrong, and therefore they don't deserve to be stripped of their Cohen status, and therefore we're going to give a default penalty of lashes. So this Gemara now is proving that when we can't apply the reciprocal penalty, we have to apply lashes, if for whatever reason that reciprocal penalty. But the problem goes is that we don't generally apply lashes unless for a non-action according to Rabbi Akiva and Rav Yosef and some of the opinions, and according to Rabbi Yehuda we do. So, and Rabbi Meir, obviously you do, there's no issue with that. And some opinions, so we're saying, look, how do we learn the case that all the rabbinic opinions seem to say that although we don't hold a person accounting for two transgressions because of the singular word wickedness, harishato, and we don't punish them from two different pasukim, what we can at least say is if there's no reciprocal penalty applicable, we do give lashes, and what's the proof? So we're saying we use the proof from the defamer that he is lashed and he pays. So that would help Rabbi Meir to say there are multiple penalties, you see? But the Gemara at this stage is only interested to know, well, the default position of non-applicable reciprocal penalty is lashes. So that is a proof for that from the defamer. And it's also proof from Edim Zomimim that lashes are there. Not when it's a negative commandment accusation, because that's just a reciprocal penalty. But we are saying there's a problem with both of them, Lance, and the problem is a defamer is unusually stringent in that you get lashed and you get to pay 100 silver shekels to the girl's father because all you did is defamatory speech. And it's unusually severe because you were going to get this girl killed. So maybe because it's unusually severe and it's a case of non-action, that's why you get to not only have two penalties, but also be lashed. Maybe in another case of non-action, you actually don't get lashes because we don't see the same level of severity because there's no payment in lashes. And then in an ordinary case of no action, maybe you don't get lashed. Maybe you just pay. And then the Gemara says, okay, so you can't learn it from the defamer alone because it's got an unusual stringency of two different penalties and also the fact of what you intended to do to her. And therefore, that's why it's unusually severe. If you take a case of Adam Zomamim, say you can learn the default position as non-reciprocal penalty, you can learn lashes from there. And then we learn with the case of Adam Zomamim, it's also got its own severity. What is that? Is you can get lashed without a warning. And every other place in the Gemara, when you get death penalty or lashes, you have to be forewarned that you're doing a particular sin. And that sin is going to come with a consequence of lashes or death. Do you get what I'm saying? So we're saying maybe in this case of Adam Zomamim, because of that non-warning and getting lashes, and it's a non-action, you can learn that case. In that case, it's a non-action and you get lashes. But maybe because of the severity, in another case where there's no action but merely defamatory speech, you wouldn't get lashes because that is severe. So you can't learn a model of severity to a model of less severity where it's more lenient. So the Gemara says, listen, you're focusing on the wrong thing. You're looking at the severity in each case and say, look, if you mix severity with non-action, that's why you get lashes. And this Adam Zomamim has its own particular severity of non-warning. The defamer has paying and lashes, which is two punishments and a non-action. So either case is not a model, since they're both stringent in their own ways for the normal cases of non-action, which are obviously a little bit more lenient. So the Gemara said, what you need to do now is focus on a different principle. And that principle is known as Sad Hashaveh, which is the common characteristic, which is part of the human nautical principles. So it's basically it's a general principle derived from two verses. So in other words, its application is based on the assumption that if two different cases enjoy a similar law, the law is caused by that common characteristic shared by both cases. So we're not focusing there on the stringency, but we look at all cases that have a similar law, and then it can serve as a model. So they're similar in what respect? They're similar in the respect of the fact of it is they both are non-actions, okay? And they also both get lashes. So if you learn the common characteristics between them, non-action cases that get the lashes, but the key point here is their stringencies are different. Because if the stringencies were the same, we could say it's those common characteristics of sharing the same stringency and being a non-action which causes lashes to happen. And therefore, in a different case where there's no shared stringency and there's a non-action, we might not apply lashes. But the stringency here, the unique stringency of each is different to the other. And that's the principle. That's the only time you can apply, hang on, the common characteristic. But if they had the common stringency, that could make it unique to those cases and not serve as a model. Yeah, Lance?
Sort of slightly off the topic, but why is it always 39 lashes? Why isn't it depending on stringency, on the level of whatever the guy's doing, 10 lashes, 20 lashes, or 30? Why is it 39 or nothing? Then they
It's
have
not
to check
30,
this
it's not 39 or nothing. It's an excellent question. It's not 39 or nothing because we take into account the person's health, his level of embarrassment. I mean, we learned if a guy soils himself after 3, you call it a day. It's health, it's embarrassment, it's circumstantial. We're saying when it uses the term 39, it means up to 39, technically, up to 39.
Okay.
Otherwise, half the Jewish population would be dead after lashes. Granted that they'd learn a lesson and say no to dowry, we're not going to do this again. And it would serve as a wonderful deterrent, but most people couldn't do the 39 lashes. So it's up to. Like when they give you a death penalty case, they say life imprisonment, but one is eligible for parole. Well, life imprisonment could have concurring sentences. It's an up to principle. So as long as we end off on the shear's note to know that if both the cases of the defamer and the Edim Zumimim had the same unique stringencies, and that both were non-actions, you can't apply that to a case where those unique stringencies that are shared by both did not occur in the third case where there's no action. You couldn't apply lashes. But if their unique stringencies were different, and you're saying, well, that's why they got lashes, even though there was no action attached, we could say, but the common characteristics are that they got lashes for no action based avera, for false testimony. But what made them stringent is not shared by the other, because we learn from the defamer that, that in the case of Adam Zomimim, even though you only have one penalty, which is lashes, for an action, you still get lashed. And we learn the case of the defamer from Adam Zomimim the other way around, saying, there's no warning in Adam Zomimim, but for the defamer there is a warning. So that's not a reason to preclude it. Do you get what I'm saying?
Okay.
So in other words, anything that they shared in common in the two cases can't be used for a third. So if they're unique, each one is unique, but they have a common principle, no action, and the rest of the uniqueness doesn't apply, it can be applied. The question that's going to result if they're both seen as a fine, how do you place that for compensatory damages when some of the rabbis don't see it